Hey guys. So, over the next couple weeks, what we're going to do is go over the book of Ruth. Ruth is a really cool book because we get to see a lot of how God has designed and how God will use a lot of his prophecies and how they'll be fulfilled over many, many years. So, this is just a really cool book. Also, it's very applicable to today with what's going on in our life with COVID-19 and some of the struggles that we're probably facing as not only individuals but as a culture as well. So the book of Ruth kind of jumps into the setting, and it tells us in verse 1, it says, in the time of the judges. So this book is actually, like the stuff that's happening in this book is actually happening during the book of Judges. So if you've never read the book of Judges to see what's going on throughout Israel and kind of the known world at the time, you should go back and read the book of Judges. But our story really has three main characters. It has Naomi, and it has Ruth, and a guy named Boaz. Today we're only going to talk about Naomi and Ruth. We'll get to Boaz here and over the next couple weeks. But those are our three main people. And the book of Ruth kind of introduces us to this family in Bethlehem. It says that there's a famine going on. They're kind of struggling. And so this family picks up and leaves from Bethlehem and goes to this country of Moab. Which would be very interesting because Moab, the Moabites, are actually enemies of Israel at the time. They kind of come up in and out of the Old Testament narrative quite a bit. They bring in gods like Baal and Moloch. So we talk about them a little bit more often throughout history. And so then it kind of tells us who these people are. It says the father's name is Elimelech. I know it's a hard name to say, but Elimelech, it's about to get harder. Naomi, who is the mom, who we know about already. And then they have two sons, Mahlon and Chilion. I don't know if those are actually how you say them. It's probably wrong. I probably butchered it, but that's okay. But this is their family of parents and two sons. And so they move to Moab, and while they're there, the father dies. Could have been from sickness. Probably sickness because Moab at the time actually wasn't in famine. They actually had plenty. And so probably was sick and died. And somewhere along quickly after that, the two sons married two Moabite women. One named Orpah, not Oprah, as a lot of people like to say. Her name is Orpah. And Ruth. And so they get married and everything's going well for about 10 years. And then the sons die. And so Naomi is now left by herself with her daughter-in-laws, and they don't have kids, so it's just these two single women, or these three single women, and which, if we think about it, at this time was very dangerous, as basically all of culture and life is dependent on, for the women anyway, dependent on her husband and her husband's family, because remember it says they leave their father and mother and they become one. And most of the time the wife just left her family mostly altogether, and became dependent just on the father's family. And so this would be a huge culture shock. And so Naomi kind of gets to thinking and has heard that the famine in Bethlehem is over, and since Israel's kind of going back to thriving and having everything, and she has no immediate family here, and though she probably doesn't have any immediate family there, as we'll get to here in a little bit, she knows that the Israelite culture is to take care of the widows. So she goes back to Bethlehem. She won't have the best of life, but she'll have a better life in Bethlehem than she will in Moab. But that leaves the problem of her two daughter-in-laws. And in fact, she never calls them daughter-in-laws. She just says, my daughters. And so they sit down and have this conversation where she basically tells them, hey, I'm going to go back to Bethlehem. I'm going to go back to my country. Y'all need to go back home to your parents. Go back to your families because they're still young. Moabites, they're probably still going to have a chance of getting married and finding husbands to take care of them. And so she encourages them to go back. And you kind of see the strain there because she says, man, my daughters, and you hear the brokenness in Naomi because she loves them. But she wants to do what's best for them because she knows that a single Moabite widowed woman living in Bethlehem and Judah, man, that'd be hard for them. It's already gonna be hard for Naomi, but they'll take care of her. Moabite women, they were looked down upon, and so this would have been a very difficult time for them. And so after some convincing, Orpah kisses Naomi and she runs away crying, and a very iconic scene if this was a movie. And this is where we get kind of one of the most famous quotes of the Bible. Ruth and looks at her mother-in-law and goes, "Do not force me to go." And verses 16 and 17 is really what has become famous over the years. It says, where you go, I will go, and where you lodge, I will lodge, and your people will be my people, and your God will be my God, and where you die, I will die, and where you're buried, I will be buried. So I know we like to use that a lot at weddings. Fun fact, that's the daughter-in-law talking to her mother-in-law, so not husband and wife. So it's not necessarily wrong for a wedding, but it's kind of missing the point if you say that to your spouse. Different story for a different day. But that point is where we see the faithfulness of Ruth. And I don't want to throw Orpah under the bus, but we start seeing the true character of who Ruth is and how committed she is and how seriously she took her covenant to her husband and to her husband's family. And so the chapter 1 closes with Naomi and Ruth going back to Bethlehem. And when she enters Bethlehem, she basically becomes the talk of the town. And people go, "Oh, is this not Naomi who left and this and that, went with her husband and her two sons got married and blah, 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 blah." And after a little bit of time, you see Naomi get a little bit more aggressive, and she tells him, "Do not call me Naomi, but call me Mara." And this is a big shift because Naomi means pleasant or happy. Well, Mara, it means bitter. And we see this a little bit earlier in the passage if you read it, but here we see it, she says, "I'm bitter because I left with everything and I came back with nothing. I left with a husband and two sons and a bright future and on an adventure, and I've returned empty-handed." And we see the heartbreak in Naomi, who wants to be called Mara or bitter, because she feels so empty and alone. Even with Ruth, the weight of losing her husband and her sons and having no grandkids, especially at that time, would be such a huge burden to bear. And it ends by saying that they entered the town during the harvest. And this will become very important later as we get into chapter 2. But you might be asking, well, why is this important to us today? Like, what does Ruth matter in our lives? For a lot of different reasons, Ruth really, really matters. And the biggest one right now is we're seeing ourselves kind of in a similar situation. A lot of us have experienced a pretty good life, right? Even like lower income, we still have a lot. And this is the first time we're going to go, I entered into this time of COVID-19 full, and a lot of us are going to feel pretty empty-handed by the end of this because the economy is taking a hard hit. And this is going to change how we do life, and it's going to be a little bit difficult for a while. But as we look forward, and both in our life and in the story, we will get to see how God uses these bad things for our benefit, for His benefit, to show His power and His mercy and His grace and who His character truly is. And so this is one of my favorite stories. If you want to get a little bit more in depth, there's a quick 7-minute video by the Bible Project that you can look up on YouTube. And also one of my favorite sermon series on this is by a guy named Alistair Begg on the Truth for Life podcast. And there'll be a link for those in the description. But one of my favorite parts of this, as we'll get to read, is we get to see a really cool picture of what marriage is supposed to be like and the weight of what it is. And in a culture where love is such a word tossed around, we'll get to see what true love really looks like. So we love you guys. Look in the description for some deeper stuff, and we'll see you later.